Hey guys, how are you? I hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing a movie review. This movie is a horror film from France, French and English language, released in the year 2015, directed by Julian Terry, and this movie is called Night Fair. So Night Fair is about this Englishman. He is from London, and 2 years previous he was in Paris, and he had a girlfriend and everything looked good for him, but for a reason I'm not going to go into, he's had to return to England. So he's going back to Paris again, and this time he's going to try and ignite that old love flame, but when he gets there he realises that his old girlfriend has now moved on with his French friend. So he's a little bit disappointed by this. He's torn up and he doesn't like seeing them together. So one night they're at a party, all of them together, and once again he can see his friend with his old girlfriend and he doesn't like that, so he wants to leave. He goes outside, he's going to catch a cab and go back to his hotel, but his friend basically chases him outside and says, look, it's too early to go home, you've got to come out with me, we're going to go out on the town, we're going to have some fun. So reluctantly this Englishman accepts, and they both get into a cab and they go to the destination. So when they get to their destination they realise that they don't have any money to pay the taxi driver, so they decide to do a runner. And so this Englishman is regretful of this decision. He says we should go back and pay him, it's the right thing to do, but the Frenchman says don't worry, he'll get over it. And that's the last they're going to hear of it. But that's not the last they're going to hear of it, because it turns out that this taxi driver is in fact a psychopath, and he's going to track them down through the streets of Paris in order to basically make them pay for what they have done. So it's going to turn into a terrifying game of cat and mouse, and who comes out of it in the end is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Night Fair. After seeing the trailers for this film, I thought this was the movie that was going to revitalise French horror and hopefully start a new wave of French horror. Now, if you guys follow me on Facebook, you will know that not long ago I made a post basically outlining my disappointment in French horror recently. Now, when it comes to French horror, I think that they are the lead runners in this genre, is because French horror is not afraid to push the boundaries of what's acceptable. It's not afraid to push the boundaries and show you something truly shocking, which gives it much more of an impact. And on top of that, you've got great characters, and it just feels like much more respect to a horror fan than you would get from a Hollywood film. So between the years 2000 and 2010, I thought horror films from France were in abundance, and they were just as good as each other. Now, the main four films, you've got Martyrs, Inside, Frontiers and High Tension, and those movies really hit the world by storm, and it showed you just how ballsy French horror was. And so it was a very exciting time to be a horror fan if you're a fan of subtitle films than what France were delivering. But after 2010 they've gone into a quiet period, and the movies that have come out have been very mediocre, and they just can't live up to the days of the glory days, and it feels like they're trying to revive the horror genre in this country, but they're just having a lot of difficulty doing it. So after seeing the trailer to Night Fair, I thought, yes, I'm onto a winner here, and hopefully this is going to give me new hope that French haven't lost their touch. And unfortunately at the end of this film, I thought it was lacking that X factor to really elevate it to a typical French horror fare, but I will say that it's still a fairly entertaining film, and it is a fairly impressive film. Now, to start off with, I'll go into the positives first off. You've got a very, very good cinematography. It's very reminiscent of Nicholas Winding Refn's Drive and also the remake of Maniac, and it also shares a very similar soundtrack. So it feels like a throwback to the 80s, where you've got movies that just from the soundtrack and the cinematography suck you in. And I think Night Fair, from the very first credits, it actually sucks you into the world. This Paris nightlife, it actually felt like just seediness, and that it was a world of its own, and that straight away you're absorbed into it. It feels like the movie has just captured you and has actually made you take notice. And so that was a very, very good start, but unfortunately I think this movie does promise a lot of things through the camera work. I thought it was very, very stylish, and it shows you that the people who made this film really know what they're doing, but there's a lot of promises that the movie makes that later on it doesn't really deliver, because I didn't feel it was as consistent as it really should have been. Now, I will say, yeah, apart from the cinematography, there were very good moments of suspense. There were moments that reminded me of Judgment Day, which is Emilio Estevez's film. I really liked that movie. It was a movie about these friends being chased through the streets. It almost felt like a completely nightmarish world, because it felt like they were the only ones existing, and that these streets were empty and that they had nowhere to hide. They just had to keep running. And ultimately that's what you get in this film, is that this taxi driver is chasing them, and it feels like they've got nowhere to hide, and that this taxi driver is always one step ahead. So I really liked that, and I just thought it created a certain sense of eeriness. And the villain to this film was the best part of this movie, is that his identity for the most part was concealed. He was in the shadows, and you didn't know if this guy was actually a human or he was something of a paranormal entity, is because he felt like he was invincible, and that just gave him even more menace. And so when he's dispatching people that get into his way, you feel that he's very strong, and that yes, if these guys are caught, all hell is about to break loose. So it does give you that fear of not being caught. And I actually love the idea of the taxi as well. The taxi actually had an entity of its own. It felt like a throwback to the days of Christine, you know, those monster car films. So there's a lot of inspiration that Julian Seri has actually taken and he's thrown into this film that will appeal to a lot of fans who like those movies that have gone before it. So it does actually feel like it has a lot of respect, and as far as production is concerned, I just thought that it actually had a very high standard. I didn't know how high this budget was, but it actually looks like it was money very well spent. And then you've got the brutality that is typical of French horror. It is few and far between, but when it does hit you, it was fairly impressive, and I thought it was very nasty as well. Then the ending hits you as well. The ending I thought gave you a lot to think about, which I can give as a positive and a negative. I'll give the negative a little bit later, but the positive is that it does give it a little bit of depth, and it does make you think about it, and it does last in the memory somewhat. Although the movie is not, you're not going to remember it weeks later, it does make you think about it after you've watched it. So that's something that gives it a little bit of ambiguity and does give you something to contemplate by the end of it. But unfortunately for me, the reason why this film falls flat is because of the fact that two main characters are just not likeable. They're very 2D hollow cardboard cutouts. And the movie tries to give these characters complexity when it didn't need it, because it doesn't really give you any more insight. Yes, it gives you an insight into their past, but it doesn't give them any more likeable qualities. So it feels like, okay, that was a waste of time. You didn't need that. All this movie needed was the classic cat and mouse. You know, in Judgment Night from the United States, they didn't have any character development. It was just about bad guys chasing good guys. And that's why that movie was so fun, is because it didn't distract itself. It was very fluent. And, you know, the continuity was very good, and it was very suspenseful because it wasn't stopping to give you an insight into unnecessary moments. And so there are some side plots to this film that really get in the way of actually enjoying the film as much as you really should. And so that was my biggest disappointment, and I think that the ending was a classic example of this, is that yes, this should have been simplistic, but at the end it decides that it has to have a little twist, a clever twist, and it's going to try and make you think. Now naturally that's not a bad thing because it doesn't do it horribly, but it just would have been so much better if there was just a lot more simplicity to this movie. This is a case of biting off a little bit more than you can chew, giving the audience a little bit more than they probably, you know, that it gives it more than they actually need. And so there are cases where you can just have a lot of fun with a film, and I think this movie wants to have fun, but it's also scared of being a little bit too simplistic, therefore it's complicating matters when it doesn't need to be complicated, and so it comes across as a little bit of a drag. And so I really didn't like that. I thought, as I said at the start, it promises a very fun film, but it doesn't really deliver that to the point where you're going to be saying, I'm going to be recommending this to all of my friends. It's not a bad film. But if you are a fan of French horror and you're expecting something that is going to be of the standard of typical French horror, you're going to come away from this film feeling very, very disappointed. So overall, not a terrible film. There are some very good moments, very well shot, but unfortunately it just doesn't have that X factor to really elevate itself above the norm. So overall for Night Fair, going to give it 3 stars. Still go out there and see it, just don't get your hopes up too high. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed. Till next time, keep watching movies. I'll see you later.